Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into a really controversial topic, a proposal that sounds like it's ripped straight from a dystopian novel. We're talking about this proposal to deport natural-born U.S. citizens, specifically those convicted of violent crimes, to a prison in El Salvador called the Terrorism Confinement Center, or CECOT.
Wow, that's heavy. So, we're not just talking about immigration policy here, but about citizens, the very people born in the U.S., being sent away.
Exactly, and it's unprecedented. You know, citizenship isn't a conditional benefit that can be taken away arbitrarily. It's supposed to come with inalienable rights, right?
Yep,
This
right.
proposal challenges the very notion of what American citizenship means.
So you're saying that this isn't just a policy tweak, but a fundamental shift in how we view the rights of our citizens?
Precisely. It's not just about punishing criminals. It's about stripping away due process and the inherent legal protections our Constitution guarantees us. I mean, the 5th and 14th Amendments ensure fair treatment and the right to a just trial.
Absolutely. And under this plan, citizens could be removed without having proper legal representation or a transparent trial. That really undermines our whole legal framework.
Right. There's a specific case that really highlights the issue. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a U.S. citizen, was deported from Maryland to El Salvador, despite a court order stating otherwise. The Supreme Court eventually ruled it illegal, yet get this, the administration hasn't helped him return.
That's just unacceptable. It sounds like there's a blatant disregard for due process, which is, one of those sacred pillars of our legal system.
Absolutely. And then we have the 8th Amendment to consider. It explicitly prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Now, CECOT is globally condemned for overcrowding, torture, and inhumane treatment of prisoners. Even if someone has been convicted of a violent crime, sending them there would essentially be subjecting them to barbarism.
That really crosses a line. But what do you say to folks who argue that violent criminals, because of their actions, might somehow deserve a harsher punishment?
That's a fair question. But the Constitution doesn't allow for double standards. Violating due process and using institutions known for brutality fundamentally undermines our nation's commitment to justice. One wrong can't justify another, no matter the crime.
Right, exactly. Also, isn't there a legal basis issue? I mean, on what ground does the government assert it can deport its own citizens to a foreign land like that?
Yes, that's another huge red flag. Legal scholars across the board agree there's no precedent, no proper statute that gives the federal government this authority. You might hear some officials throw out the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, but that law only applies to non-citizens, not natural-born Americans.
Sounds like a classic legal stretch. So it's not just politically or constitutionally problematic, it's also, legally speaking, off base without any real foundation.
Exactly. And then there are also the human rights implications to consider. CECOT has been labeled a humanitarian crisis zone. Law enforcement or government actions can't send people, even violent offenders, to places where human rights are cruelly abused.
Yeah, it really makes you question what sort of country we're aiming to be. And historically, when governments adopt such extreme measures, it sets a dangerous precedent. Today, it's violent criminals. Tomorrow, it could be political opponents, journalists, even peaceful protesters.
Right, and that's what really makes this proposal so alarming. Citizenship is meant to be a shield, not something you can just revoke because of political convenience or any arbitrary classification.
It's like giving up the very essence of what makes us a country of laws and not of power. You mentioned earlier that this proposal is not just unconstitutional, but un-American. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. The idea of forcibly exiling citizens to a brutal foreign prison undermines not only legal protections, but also the moral compass of our nation. It erodes trust and implies that citizens can be treated as second class depending on the political climate.
Right, nested hypocrisy, if ever there was one. But I have to ask, might there be any argument that these measures could potentially deter violent crime? I mean, some might say, tougher punishment leads to fewer crimes.
That's a common argument, but here's where I respectfully challenge that view. Punishment isn't just about deterrence, it's about justice and upholding constitutional rights. It's like, imagine if a teacher decided that any student who misbehaved would be sent to a notoriously harsh detention facility where rules were arbitrary and there was no clear path for appeal. Even if that deters some misbehavior, at what cost does it come?
Yeah, that analogy really hits home. Absolutely, it's the kind of slippery slope that could eventually erode the very foundation of the legal system.
Exactly. And beyond the legal and institutional issues, there's the broader question of identity. What does it mean to be an American? It's not just a legal status. It's tied to a set of values: freedom, due process, and a fair justice system. Once you start overturning those, you risk losing the soul of the nation.
You got that right. I'm actually struck by how this proposal almost feels like a throwback to authoritarian regimes. I mean, it kind of reminds you of historical instances where governments would target segments of the population to silence dissent or consolidate power.
Exactly, and that's really where the danger lies. Once you allow the government to arbitrarily strip away citizenship rights, the scope for abuse becomes enormous. It's a precedent that can easily be extended beyond just violent criminals.
Yeah, and then who decides next? Journalists, political critics? Right, and considering the current global climate, if we start picking winners and losers in terms of rights, we can easily slide into authoritarianism.
Precisely. It's like a house of cards. Once you remove one critical support, everything else can collapse. Citizenship is supposed to be the unshakable basis of belonging in this country.
Absolutely. And it's not a privilege that can be revoked on a whim. And then there's also the international perspective. Deporting citizens to a place like CECOT would be seen as a massive breach of human rights.
Yeah, international laws and human rights standards are clear on not subjecting individuals to inhumane conditions. Sending our citizens to a place known for torture and overcrowding would not only damage our reputation, but also bring about serious diplomatic repercussions.
And it would invite plenty of legal challenges from the global community, I'm sure. It's almost as if the proposal tries to justify itself by saying, we're just targeting violent criminals. But once you start down that path, ethical boundaries become blurry.
Exactly. And here's another point. It creates a dangerous double standard. What if, hypothetically, tomorrow a different government decided to do something similar for political reasons? The precedent remains dangerous.
That's the slippery slope everyone warns about. Right, and it really challenges us to think about what principles we're willing to sacrifice in the name of security or punishment.
Yeah, it's a high-stakes debate. One could argue that in a bid to protect society, lawmakers sometimes overstep boundaries. But the key is that those boundaries, the constitutional and moral ones, must not be compromised. It's like saying we sacrifice a little freedom for a little safety until suddenly you've sacrificed everything.
And that's when society loses its fundamental protections, when due process and rights become abstract concepts.
Exactly. The very idea that someone could be deported to a foreign prison without a proper trial or representation is antithetical to the principles this country was built on.
Yeah, it's not just a legal issue, it's a moral one. It's really a wake-up call, isn't it? Not just to think about the immediate policy implications, but to reflect on what kind of society we want to be going forward.
Absolutely. And even if the proposal is aimed at a narrow group, violent criminals, it opens the door to a future where rights can be selectively applied.
That's a dangerous precedent to set. I mean, look at history. We've seen how quickly public safety measures can evolve into tools of repression. Once the state starts picking and choosing which citizens deserve protection, there's no stopping it.
Right, and that's exactly the point. Citizenship should be a guaranteed shield against state overreach. It's not a status that's up for negotiation based on one's behavior or political circumstances.
That really puts it into perspective. And speaking of perspective, I gotta ask, do you think there's any realistic path to reforming these kinds of proposals before they take root?
Well, it starts with awareness and public discourse. People need to understand the constitutional, legal, and moral implications of such measures. Without that, any policy change, no matter how disguised as law and order, will eventually erode our democratic foundations.
Right. It's all about questioning policies that threaten our core values. It's a heavy topic, but we owe it to ourselves to discuss these issues openly, even if it's not the most comfortable conversation.
Exactly. If we don't speak up now, we risk a future where citizenship is a tool of control rather than protection, and that's a future none of us should want.